Hey guys, what's going on? Blaine back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to be talking about The Lost Pirate Kingdom. The Lost Pirate Kingdom is one of the more interesting documentaries I've had the pleasure of watching on Netflix to date. The show reminded me a bit about Tiger King, just in terms of the fact that it's presented across multiple episodes, 6 of them to be precise. But unlike that show, which was set in reality, this show is part drama and part documentary, so it's kind of like multiple things wrapped into one. It features interviews with historians and pirate experts, and they talk about what they know in great detail, and then on the other side of the coin, we see dramatic reenactments about all these pirates that they keep talking about. You may be able to recognize a few names in this show, but chances are you may not be familiar with all of them. It talks about people like Black Sam Bellamy, Benjamin Hornigold, Henry Jennings, and of course the infamous Edward Thatch, aka Blackbeard. It talks about a few other people here and there, of course, but those are the main central figures that are focused on across the 6 episodes of the show. Also, I feel that this show kind of does away with all the preconceived notions that were previously associated with the word pirate. When most people hear the word pirate, they think of some sort of Captain Hook-like figure that has a parrot on their shoulder and a metal hook for an arm, and obviously that's not the case as far as a real-life pirate is concerned. Also, there's this notion that pirates were obsessed with treasure and gold and jewels, any sort of valuable you can think of, and then going to bury them in treasure chests on the beach and then going to dig them up later, that sort of thing. And there is some part of that in this documentary. It does focus a little bit on the treasure side of things, but not as much as you might expect. Rather, it focuses more on the life of a pirate, what it was like to be one. It focuses more on how they chose to live life on their terms outside of British colonial rule while trying to escape from the authorities from their previous home countries by any means possible. And so the documentary covers the golden age of piracy, first going back to the beginning when there was an international conflict between England and Spain as they were trying to vie for control over the Caribbean. England and Spain are at war with each other, they're trying to fight for who controls what, and then some people end up splintering off from those countries and try to start a new life for themselves away from their rule. There is a bit more detail as far as the origin story is concerned, but that's pretty much the basic gist of where most pirates began. And then from there it follows around a series of events that are centered around characters like I mentioned, Benjamin Hornigold, Henry Jennings. Those are the 2 main ones from the beginning, and I found their stories very fascinating. Benjamin Hornigold is looked at as this uncouth, rough around the edges kind of guy, but also has a sense of honor about him. Henry Jennings is looked at as this elite member of high society who was slowly becoming overcome by greed, and I think Blackbeard was the most interesting character in the show. He starts off as very educated and knowing how to speak Latin, and he's not exactly a person you would think of as far as being a pirate, but he eventually contracts syphilis and starts to go mad, and this madness starts to take on an alter ego in the form of Blackbeard. Out of all the characters, or people if you will, that were portrayed in the show, I felt that Blackbeard's arc in the story felt the most complete. It just felt like we got a sense of how he started, all the things he did in the middle, and he had a proper conclusion to his journey. One thing I didn't know before watching this show was just how much of a role that black former slaves had when it came to the success of a pirate's fleet. In pretty much every episode of the show that I can think of, it shows a lot of ex-slaves that are participating in the planning process when it comes to taking down other ships and stealing treasure. I just had no idea that ex-slaves had so much of a role when it came to organizing all these things going on with pirates. And not just that they had an equal role in terms of work, but they were never looked down upon for their skin color. They treated them equally. It didn't matter if you were white or if you were black. If you were seen as a human being and you could help out the fleet, you were always welcome. This show does a great job portraying the time period it takes place in. It goes back and forth between 18th century North America and London, England, and it shows the conflicts that are happening between the pirates in North America versus the colonialists in England. Everything from the sets to the hair and makeup that people wear all perfectly represent the time period that it takes place in. There is a little bit of corny CGI here and there that's used to depict the pirate ships as well as the ships that are docked in England, but you only really notice how ugly they are if you squint and look at it real hard. It's never really bad enough that it gets in the way of the story. And on top of all this, I just really love how it was presented in terms of narration. I think Derek Jacobi is the name of the person who narrated the show. He does an absolutely brilliant job doing it. He reminded me a lot of David Attenborough, just from his accent and how how enthusiastic he was about it. You could tell that he really loved talking about pirates, and that enthusiasm transcends to the audience that chooses to watch this documentary. There's a real fun sort of vibe that comes attached with this show, and there's a little bit of cheesiness that comes with it too. It feels like everyone's just overacting a little too much when it comes to being a pirate, but I would imagine that's how they were during those times. I imagine that in order to live the lifestyle that they chose to live, those kinds of people would have to be at least a little bit eccentric, and those kinds of personality come out in the show really well. There were only a few characters that I found were lacking in terms of personality and depth, and maybe that was just because of the story they chose to tell, and they didn't really dedicate a lot of focus to those characters in that respect, but there were a few characters that I felt could have had a little bit more backstory behind them. Anne Bonny is the only female pirate that appears in the show, and I was really fascinated at the fact that there were female pirates to begin with, and I would have loved to see more of her in the show, but they basically only show her to be this kind of floozy woman that sleeps around with a bunch of other male pirates, and there just wasn't really enough detail to go behind her other than the fact that she likes to have sex a lot. I just felt that that was a very poor representation of the history behind her, and maybe that was a defining trait, but I felt they could have talked a bit more than just the sex part. I also thought the way they portrayed Charles Vane was a little weak. They make him out to be this psychopathic character that's really unhinged and on the edge, but when you get right down to it, they only show him in like 2 or 3 scenes acting like a real menace. And then the rest of the show basically shows him being Jennings' lapdog or somebody else's lapdog. I just thought that he was a very weak character overall, and he could have had a little bit more oomph to his personality. But honestly, those are just little nitpicks. When you get right down to it, The Lost Pirate Kingdom is a very fun ride. To be honest, I had no knowledge of what pirates were like in those times. I mean, I had some idea based on what movies and books and other things told me, but I didn't really know about the concrete history behind them and what led to them becoming pirates. And this show does a great job showing how they came to be. It shows that piracy didn't start out, at least initially anyway, as ways to commit crime. They just simply did it because they wanted to start a new life for themselves away from British rule. The pirates managed to get their freedom from British rule, at least at first, and then they start getting drunk on that freedom to the point that they start doing things that they couldn't get away with initially, and that eventually affects the British economy by tanking their commerce routes, which will eventually lead to full-out war between the pirates and the British. All the action scenes that play out in this regard are great, especially the psychological elements that play out when Woodes Rogers is introduced. I just thought that this show was entertaining from beginning to end. If you like to learn about history but you don't want to watch a full-on documentary and prefer to be informed and entertained at the same time, I think you would love this show. I really enjoyed The Lost Pirate Kingdom. It manages to effectively tightrope the balance between fantasy and reality, and I can't wait to see more hybrid documentaries like this in the future. Anyways guys, that's going to wrap up my review of The Lost Pirate Kingdom. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review the Mexican comedy One Small Problem. Bye bye!